Welcome back to Tide Pod on the YouTube home of Tide Illustrated. Jack Knowlton, Tony Sukalis, and you know it's the busy season of college athletics with football, men's basketball, the overlap period when we're dropping the recap show for Alabama LSU on a Tuesday. We have had a wild schedule the last few days, but you know we weren't going to talk about, or we were going to talk about this game in Baton Rouge because what a huge win for Alabama. Alabama 42, LSU 13, Tony. A great Saturday night for the Crimson Tide in Death Valley. Not so much for the home LSU fans who were about cleared out of the stadium by the midway point in the fourth quarter after Alabama committed a home invasion. Best road performance of the Crimson Tide this season. How surprised and maybe how impressed were you by this result on the road for Alabama?
Look, we kept on saying like we'll find out more about Alabama. We'll find out about the real Alabama. Well, if this is the real Alabama, they're certainly a title contender again. I was really impressed. I guess you could say I was a little surprised. It's not that we haven't seen this Alabama. It's just I didn't know if we were going to see it. They've been so inconsistent, and they were really consistent the whole game. They just basically ran the ball down LSU's throat. The defense stepped up. Big turnovers. I mean, give Kane Womack his credit here. This defense has stepped up, several times over the last two games. It really seems like it's turning the corner. It's getting off the field on third downs. I'm really impressed with what I've seen from the defense. Obviously, I mean, we probably got to start with Jalen Milroe and his 185 yards and basically becoming the Tiger King. But I guess, yeah, I'm a little bit surprised, but at the same time, we've seen every aspect of this domination throughout the season. It's just a matter of kind of putting it all together against a good team on the road. Shout out to Kalen DeBoer, first SEC road victory as well.
Yeah, I think that's you hit the nail on the head there, is where we've seen the elements of what we saw collectively, but we've never seen it really come together for a full game. I think Georgia was probably the closest. But like you said, this is a complete 180 from the form we've seen from this team on the road, especially in SEC play. Vandy and Tennessee did not go the Tide's way. Wisconsin was what it was. That was early season, inferior opponent, all that stuff. But yeah, a huge win for Alabama. And you mentioned him, Jalen Milroe, Mr. November, as you called him in your column, which go read that over on Tide Illustrated. That is the perfect place to start. Like you said, we're reading his rushing yard stats first because those were better. 12 carries, 185 yards, 4 touchdowns on the night. That total helped him become the new single season leader in touchdowns by a quarterback, an Alabama quarterback. He passed Jalen Hurts, who did it at 12 in his true freshman season in 2016. Jalen Milroe now has 16 and has the chance to probably go over 20 touchdowns for a quarterback, which is impressive. Also had 12 completions for 109 yards through the air, no touchdowns, no picks. What a game for Jalen Milroe. You mentioned he's the Tiger King. He's now beat Auburn, Mizzou, and LSU, so all 3 Tiger teams in the SEC. So love that for him. But what impressed you about his performance on Saturday in terms of what he showed from a growth standpoint and leading this team after, there's been some question marks about him, this season in terms of consistency? What did you like that he really brought together on Saturday?
First off, I feel lied to because there's no way that he wasn't hurt earlier this season. There's no way that he just decided for a 2 or 3 games period that he just wasn't going to run the ball. He looked like old Jalen, or just like the Jalen Milroe we saw at the beginning of the season, where he was just taking off. And he clocked at 22.5 miles an hour on that 72-yard run. And I think somebody did the math. It's basically running a 4.3 on the field. He is Lamar Jackson fast. He's Mike Vick fast. He's Jalen Milroe fast. I mean, he's really hard to stop on some of those plays. And he opens up so much for the rest of the offense. You have to devote so much attention to his running ability that he kind of opens everything up. We kind of knew that, though. I think part of what, impressed me was, he didn't get rattled by the pressure whenever LSU showed pressure. He was very patient in his throws. I mean, Alabama he didn't do a lot in the passing game. He only had 109 yards, 12 of 18 completions. Yep. But on the plays he needed to make through the air, he was patient. He was composed. You didn't see him get rattled. I just thought that, Alabama kind of leaned to its strength. You're going to have some of these designed runs, these little hesitation runs, if you will, where Jalen, it almost looks like a misplay, but really Jalen's kind of waiting for the running back to kind of block for him. That those worked really well. I was impressed with the game plan, and impressed with Jalen. And look, if Alabama's going to they can get away with getting 109 yards through the air if they're going to be that dominant on the ground. And that's maybe just what Alabama is. And I think that's, you just kind of almost have to embrace it. If it's this successful, if you can make it this successful, you can't really argue with it.
Yeah, definitely. This was a game that it felt like Jalen Milroe wasn't trying to force anything, whether that was down to, like you said, the scheme or what Alabama was trying to force through the air. They let him, kind of do his thing on the ground. They played into what was working, took what LSU was giving them, and that ended up being a lot on the ground. And you mentioned the composure stuff. What really stood out to me, and I know you and I both wrote about this, is in those passing sequences, like you said, on the blitzes, he was going through his progressions, finding the open players, particularly at the beginning of the game. Alabama's running backs, obviously, that's kind of been the whole, there's been this dichotomy of Milroe getting involved versus how much you feeding the ball to these running backs on the ground. Jam Miller, Justice Haynes, both really involved in the pass game. Tony, what did you like there in terms of Milroe kind of making those checkdowns? Those guys kind of were his outlet, especially at the beginning of the game, as he just kind of tried to settle into a rhythm, and that really worked for him.
Yeah, I wrote about that in my gift breakdown, so check that out on the site. But basically, LSU was so keyed in on Jalen that it really opened up passes out of the backfield. You'd have two guys spying on him instead of one, or something like that on some occasions, and he'd be able to just dump the ball off. Or, probably my favorite play was the 20-yard completion to Jam Miller on the left sideline, where Alabama brings Kendrick Law in motion, kind of fakes a end around, and then almost has Jalen Milroe kind of fake to his right, as if he's going to roll out. LSU's whole defense just shifted to the left. Their left, Alabama's right. And then Jalen just kind of stops on a dime, throws it back to Jam Miller, who had blocking from Caden Proctor on the left side, and just 20 yards. Really LSU couldn't do anything about it. Just a great drawn up play by Nick Sheridan, and also what we talked about, that patience, right? Jalen didn't get too excited. He sold the rollout perfectly to the right, and then just dumped off a composed pass to the left. I mean, it's easy for him. That's not necessarily a hard play for a quarterback, but you have to execute it well. You've got to be composed in that moment, and he did everything right. So you got to give him credit for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I really liked how he was just getting the running backs involved and how they, kind of made that work. And I really thought it helped them settle into a rhythm. They recovered really well on that first drive after a penalty on the first play of the game, and you saw that and thought, oh boy. And then a couple plays later, they're in the end zone scoring on their opening drive after receiving the ball and taking it to a team, in Death Valley with a raucous fan base. I thought that took the energy out of the crowd pretty quickly. Alabama was kind of able to get control there, which is something we've never really seen on the road. I want to ask you too about the offensive line. I mean, didn't allow a sack, obviously protected, well to allow Jalen Milroe to have a good game on the ground. This is a unit that is now, we're recording this on a Tuesday, just came out there a semifinalist for the Joe Moore Award. We know DeBoer's unit won that at Washington last season. Parker Brailsford looking to go back to back if Alabama can do that this year. But what have you seen
there a little bit, right? Like
Yeah.
let's not get ahead of ourselves. I think that maybe, yeah.
That's what I was going to ask is where, how has this offensive line maybe grown, and just, the fact I think that they're at the point that they're at now, it's come a long way. I feel like from the beginning of the season, where you had some question marks at right tackle, there were some injuries early, some continuity stuff. And it seems like it's just kind of taken that another step forward. And obviously, had a dominant game, didn't allow a sack, allowed Jalen Milroe to do what he did on Saturday.
Yeah, this is a top 10. I haven't checked the numbers now, but it entered the week as a top 10. Entered last week as a top 10 sacks defense, and so it's definitely a defense that can get to the passer. Obviously, holding them without a sack was big. I think a lot of that too. I don't want to take anything away from the offensive line. They did well. Alabama did only attempt 18 passes, and a lot of those were quick passes out of the backfield, like we mentioned. But still, I mean, I think the offensive line, you still got to give them credit for protecting Jalen Milroe, and then at the same time, you've got to give them their credit for how they blocked in the running game too. I mean, they're also key to breaking a lot of these big runs, even Jalen's runs. I mean, there was some great blocking there. But yeah, I liked what I saw from Alabama's offensive line. I also just liked how, this is stuff like this kind of happens when you develop the running game early, and when you trust the running game and you kind of rely on it, you can kind of take a lot of pressure off that unit. And so, especially with what you can do with Jalen, I mean, like, you almost can't blitz that much because you're so afraid of his ability to kind of bounce off, and if you blitz Jalen, you can't get to him, and he gets to the edge or steps up through the middle, he's gone for like 70 yards or 50 yards. So a lot of times you get almost afraid to blitz. I remember a third down pass to Miller as well, where LSU blitzed middle linebacker Whit Weeks. Jalen does a good job of picking that up. Caden Proctor does a really good job of picking up Braden Swinson on the left side. And because they blitzed the Weeks, you had Jan Miller wide open over the middle, and just a composed pass from Jalen Milroe. I think it ended up being like an 11-yard gain on a 3rd and 9. Just once again, like little things like that, they really added up in this game. And you got to give Proctor a lot of credit for, Braden Swinson's pretty hard guy to block, and he managed to give Jalen enough time on that play. So yeah, I don't know if I want to call them a Joe Moore award-winning side yet. I don't think that's probably not going to happen, but it's getting a lot better. And I think that, you look at this offensive line performance compared to the one against Tennessee on the road, very different production from the unit in those two games.
Yeah, definitely. There was a big help in terms of just establishing Alabama's dominance on the road. 3rd down conversions, too, is a worthwhile stat to note and a good segue. Alabama 10 for 13 itself, so was keeping the chains moving. And on the other side,
Started
LSU
5-5. Started 5-5. Yeah.
Started 5 of 5. Impressed definitely on offense on 3rd down, and did the same thing on defense, which is a good segue. LSU was 6 of 14 on 3rd down. Alabama was getting off the field. There's a ton of places you can talk about, or things you can talk about with this defense. A ton of players you can shout out. Deontay Lawson obviously had an interception. So too did Bray Hubbard. But I think that the guy to start with on the other side of the ball in this game, Tony, is Jihaad Campbell. Just another outstanding game for the linebacker. 12 tackles, that obviously led the team. 1.5 sacks, 3 tackles for Lawson. Had a forced fumble in this game as well. Obviously, Lawson has also been huge. Jihaad Campbell, after the game, had maybe my favorite quote that I've heard in a long time, where he said Alabama came into this one with violent intentions. They showed that. How did what impressed you about Campbell and just this Alabama defense?
I don't think you can say enough about that forced fumble, because remember, Alabama had just been stopped on 4th down. That could have been a momentum shift. It seemed like every time LSU had a chance to get a momentum shift in the game, Alabama would make a big play. Campbell, the play after, that was the first play of that drive, right? So the next play after LSU gets a 4th down stop, he forces a fumble and Tim Smith recovers it. I mean, what a play. And then, you mentioned Lawson. Look, LSU drives down, completes 2 4th down conversions on their first drive of the second half. Looks like they're finally going to find the end zone. And then Garrett Nussmeier is picked off by Deontay Lawson on a terrible read by Garrett Nussmeier. I mean, like, let's also point that out. But a huge play for Deontay Lawson to intercept and have LSU come away with nothing. I mean, you pretty much knew at that point. LSU fans, they waited until the 4th quarter to go home, but they could have went home then, because after Alabama stopped them on that opening possession of the second half, it was over. And I think that was a big play. So I mean, look, Jihaad Campbell, Deontay Lawson, we've been talking about them being one of the best mid linebacking duos in the nation, in the SEC, whatever you want to say, for a while. They certainly showed it. And then, you talk about Jihaad Campbell. I mean, Kane Womack on Monday said that, you basically put him anywhere and he's going to win his, assignment. He's going to maybe have to play a little bit of outside linebacker now that Key Robinson suffered a season-ending injury, and it seems like Keanu Coate is suspended for an indefinite amount of time. So Alabama still has Quay Russell and Yanzi Pierre, two redshirt freshmen they're really confident in, but I wouldn't be surprised if you see Jihaad and a few more packages at that Wolf position, especially when you have Deontay Lawson at inside linebacker, Justin Jefferson who can step in. So they've got some guys that can fill in, and maybe you put Jihaad. And that's another great thing about Jihaad is he can just be just as effective at the Wolf position as he is at that Mike linebacker spot. So, really interested to see kind of like how they use him. But it seems like, shoot, you put him anywhere on the field, he's going to make a difference.
Yeah, the play I'll throw in there too on the first drive of the game. I mean, credit for first of all to I believe it was Devontae Smith who made the shoestring tackle when LSU could have had a 50-yard touchdown on their first offensive play or second offensive play. They get a stop and Jihaad Campbell then, makes that pass breakup on 3rd and goal, keeps LSU to a field goal. Kind of representative to me of the pride this team seems to take in making goal line stands. I think can't really be overstated. They did it, against Missouri too. They've now allowed only 14 points in the last 13 points, excuse me, in the last 2 games. Only let LSU get in the end zone once. I mean, how impressed are you by this team's just like goal line defense, ability to kind of bend but not break? That obviously goes into Lawson's interception too. LSU,
Yeah, I was
driving.
almost a little bit disappointed for him because they had done such a good job of keeping teams out of the end zone, and then LSU scores that like meaningless one late.
Garbage time.
It was close too. I mean, I was on the corner of the end zone. It's one of those plays I'm glad they didn't review it because like it was raining and I just wanted the game to be over. But that was close to I think he was in bounds, but it's not like they gave up they needed to make a great play to get a touchdown there. And I think Alabama did have a few of its backups in there as well. So, yeah, this defense does have a lot of pride. It bends and doesn't break. And I think that in today's game, that's very important. You're almost inevitably going to give up some big plays. I don't think you have the dominant defenses anymore that just completely shut teams down. There's just so much you can do on the offensive side of the ball. So many, and I think the rules kind of benefit the offense so much now that you don't have these dominant defenses that hold teams to, 3 points a game. But, holding LSU to field goals, there was 2 times where Alabama held them to field goals where LSU, would have loved to get a touchdown drive, especially that first drive that you were talking about where Jihaad broke up the 3rd and goal. I mean, LSU had a 1st and goal at the 5 on that drive and didn't score. In fact, they lost the yard. I think they ended up kicking the field goal on 4th and at the 6-yard line. So, yeah, it shows a lot of pride and 3 points in those situations is a win. I mean, especially if you have an offense like Alabama's that can score a lot of points. And so, I think that you have to have a lot of confidence in this defense. I mean, really. They gave up 13 points in 2 games, but 7 of those points were kind of garbage time points. So really 2 field goals in 2 games when it actually mattered. That's pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this team is really hitting its stride. We heard Womack talk about it on Monday, just about how this unit seems to be, he's kind of said all season that it takes a bit to just get used to his scheme. And he said his team is playing with a lot more anticipation and just seems like it's getting better at recognizing things. And I think that's really started to show. And obviously that's going to be crucial as the season goes on, as you try and finish strong. And then whatever postseason play you get, you're obviously going to have some pretty intelligent offenses you're facing. So, we'll see how that evolution kind of continues. I want to ask you, just a general question to kind of, close things out before I ask you about, where you think this team can go. We didn't touch much on the secondary. Well, what other units maybe, or, individual players stood out to you in this game? You could also talk about a negative side if you'd like with special teams. I know DeBoer on Monday kind of called that unit out a little bit, some struggles there on kickoffs. There was a negated field goal.
Not
so that
James
was kind of
Burnip, though, man. Not James Burnip. Had two punts, both inside the 20. One was 62 yards. The other one was shorter, but he pinned him at the 10. So, yeah, I'm always a fan of James Burnip, and he was probably the only good thing about the special teams. Really that day, I guess you can give Ryan Williams did have a 28-yard punt return. Maybe that was too hard. I gave the defense a D+ in my grades. Maybe I could have given them a C, or I don't know. I think that the the message board kind of wanted me to. They said I was a little too harsh. They're never happy with my grades, Jack. They if I would have given them a C, there would have been somebody that would have pointed out all the problems. But it's really kind of hard to find too many flaws in this game. I think Ryan Williams probably should have caught. It would have been a hard catch, but I think he should have caught a deep ball from Jalen Milroe for really being nitpicky. That one kind of stands out. I mean, Alabama, I guess you can, if you really wanted to get on them. I don't think it mattered because they moved the ball so well on the ground, but they could have moved. They could have. 109 yards is just not a lot of passing yards. So maybe you look at that, but I mean, they did pretty well. It's hard to nitpick this game. I mean, you look at Garrett Nussmeier, only 239 yards on 42 attempts. Also, what is LSU doing throwing 42 times in the rain? I don't know. I guess it just shows how much they can't really run the ball. But I thought the secondary did pretty well. Going up against the explosive passing attack it was going up against, and a really capable quarterback. So yeah, I think just overall a pretty good showing from Alabama.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Bray Hubbard, I think, has stepped in well at safety. He had the other interception, I should say, not just takeaway, but he stepped in well for Keon Sabb in relief. I think that's been good. But yeah, I think overall a great performance. You look to maybe have some better kickoff coverage, so LSU isn't starting the game at the 50-yard line. But yeah, I think overall it's been a pretty strong game, and that's a good segue because you'll be listening to this, on a Tuesday, and obviously the college football playoff rankings, the next edition will come out Tuesday evening. Tony, I won't ask you to speculate where Alabama will be ranked there. You can feel free to if you so choose. But after a performance like this, I mean, how far can this team go? And to me, I think the answer is pretty obvious. But how solid now are these playoff hopes for Alabama as they look to make it in?
It's just hard to imagine Alabama not making the playoff if they win out. I think I guess, if you really wanted to get into the weeds here, I think the biggest question in college football right now is what happens if they beat Mercer, Oklahoma, and Auburn and then lose to whoever in the SEC championship game, whether it be Texas or I don't know, Georgia. Like I don't know how it would play out, but if they go 10-3 with their last loss being in the SEC championship game, do they get punished for going to the SEC championship game? Really, because I think if they somehow miss out on the SEC championship game and go 10-2, they're definitely in the playoff. That's kind of a weird situation of like playing that game might end up hurting them. And you can I've heard the argument that because I've made the argument like, why would you want to play that game, right? And then the counter to that is that, oh, well, you can get a bye week in the playoff. Well, not really, because if that SEC championship game is a deciding factor, if you're gonna run the risk of not making the playoff, then that SEC championship game basically becomes a playoff game anyway. So you're not getting the bye, you're just getting it earlier, and you're having to start the playoffs earlier. And honestly, that SEC championship game is going to be harder than the first round matchup you would face if you were even if you're going to somebody else's place. I think that, more likely than not, the SEC championship game, if you're playing for your life, is harder than that first round playoff. So, I mean, if Alabama needs to win the SEC championship game, I'm not saying they can't. I'm just saying that it's not an advantageous thing to go. I don't think it's worth the first round bye to have to put your playoff chances on the line. Now we'll see what the committee does in that situation. I could totally see a 10-3 Alabama maybe getting the 12th spot.
Yeah.
I could see that, and so that would be tough because then I think you'd probably have to play I kind of think Ohio State would beat Oregon, so then you're probably having to travel to Oregon as the 12-5 game, which, damn, that'd be a hell of a matchup, right? But yeah, I mean, to answer your question, I think I've just kind of gone in the weeds too much there. Alabama can be a title contender. I think it's right up there with the Ohio States. I mean, shoot, you got to still put Georgia there, but wow, Texas, Oregon. I think they're there with all those teams. It's just a matter of what Alabama team shows up, because I'm still not ready to forget about the Alabama team that showed up against Tennessee on offense, or the Vanderbilt game, or the second half of Georgia. I mean, this team still has its warts, even though it didn't look like they had them against LSU. But I think you're going to have a run of games where you can really build some momentum. I mean, you got Mercer's not going to do anything. I think you rest anybody that's a little bit injured in this Mercer game. We won't get a injury report this week, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's a few even notable guys kind of sit out that they're probably just sitting out because they don't need to play in this one. And I think after that, the trip to Oklahoma could be tricky. It's a hard place to play, and Oklahoma's got a good defense, but man, that Oklahoma team just has no offense, and I don't see it being able to do anything. And then you've got the Iron Bowl. Iron Bowl is always tough, but it's in Bryant-Denny, and Auburn looks like a mess at the quarterback position. And if Alabama can stop Garrett Nussmeier, I think they can stop Peyton Thorne. So, I think you build up the momentum over those 3 games. And then I think Alabama could be a real force. But we're just going to have to see, moving forward. But, you kind of like the momentum, and you kind of like the path Alabama has after this win over LSU.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's just a momentum swinger. And now you kind of take these 3 games, work out as many kinks as you can, and then go from there. And then, I totally agree with the conversation. I think it's going to be a really interesting championship season this year in terms of what you do with some of those teams that are, there's other teams. It's not just Alabama that are in kind of similar spots. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of plays out there. But there's your LSU recap. Alabama with a huge win. Let's finish the show, Tony, with some basketball talk, because of course, like I said at the top, we are in that in between stage. We got football and hoops going on, non-conference for Alabama basketball, and the Tide have started 3-0, but tested in its last 2 games, Tony, against teams very familiar with Nate Oates, Arkansas State and McNeese. Of course, Arkansas State led by Brian Hodgson, the former Alabama assistant, and McNeese led by the great Will Wade, who Alabama fans love so dearly. I did see at least one FBI shirt worn on Monday night.
There's a whole FBI chant, but yeah.
There was, yes, and some FBI chants in Coleman for Mr. Will Wade. But Alabama is 3-0, and I just starting broadly here, I mean, what's been your biggest takeaway from these first 3 games of the season for the renowned Crimson Tide and its deep roster of fun newcomers and veteran returners?
I think Alabama's just played with its food. I think they were tested, I guess, against Arkansas State and McNeese State, but you never felt like they were going to lose. It wasn't like a thing where they, get down and they had to panic, or they had to show their I don't know if there was any clutch moments really in those. I guess you can talk about, Latrell Wrightsol's 3 last night to kind of pull them back. I mean, there was, I guess, I don't want to say there's no clutch moments, but there was never a moment where you were like, whew, Alabama survived. It was like they were always going to win. They were going to pull it away. They had too much talent. I think this is why Nate Oates scheduled these kind of games instead of just scheduling the cupcake mid-majors, because they kind of do show the things he needs to work on heading into what will be a gauntlet. We'll get to that. So I think that, Alabama, it's not a flawless team yet. I think it can almost become a flawless team. It's got too much talent to lose to some of these teams, even when it does make mistakes. That's another takeaway I think I'd say. But there's still a lot to be fixed. And I think there are lesser Alabama teams that might be 1 and 2 right now. The teams that we have seen that don't have this much talent that might be 1 and 2 right now based on the way that they played.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think my biggest takeaway from what I hear, mostly from what coaches like Brian Hodgson and Will Wade have said, is just, to kind of piggyback off of your point, it is just an insanely deep team. It's a hard team to stop for 40 minutes because they can throw so many different looks at you. I think Will Wade said it best, where he said Nate Oates has 2 of everything. You have so much depth. They ran into, foul trouble against Arkansas State, and it didn't really seem to matter. Jaron Stevenson had 4 fouls in the first half of that game, and that felt like a footnote just because he only finished with 4. He didn't have to play. Alabama didn't have to worry about, getting him back on the floor because it was a mismatch situation. Even Clifford Omeroy, who uh, yeah, obviously has made a big impact, and I think will take this team to new heights. There's been times where he hasn't had to be on the floor, and Alabama still has success. Grant Nelson had an amazing game against McNeese, as Alabama's kind of primary big there. So I think you're right. I think
Darryl, man. I
yeah,
do. I'm always skeptical when it comes to these, freshman bigs. But he's not your average freshman big. I mean, first of all, he's got some beef on him. He's not this awkwardly tall freshman that needs to gain weight heading into the to kind of bang bodies at the next level. Like, he looks like a grown man out there, and he provides really good minutes for when, like you said, that they're trying to manage Cliff's minutes and not overdo him. And I think that's a huge difference maker as well. It's just, we talk about the depth is, getting that kind of performance from a freshman. Yeah, it is huge.
yeah. So I think that's what has shown the most is just that depth is very real, and it's going to continue probably to get better as some of these guys kind of settle. You kind of already answered my next question, but I was going to ask which newcomer has impressed you the most, other than whether it's a transfer or a freshman. But sounds like maybe Sherelle. Obviously, LeBaron Philon's a pretty easy one as well.
Yeah, I mean, well, obviously Cliff is too. I really
Yeah,
like, sometimes you just forget, like, he had those 3 blocks. None of them were like swatting the ball out of the gym. So, like, maybe, I don't know, like, when I look down at the stat sheet, you're like, oh wow, 3. But it's not to say that they're quiet or they weren't as impressive, but it's just, I think he's just quietly efficient sometimes, and his ability to just get rebounds. I'm drawn to the bigs. I think more. Yeah, LeBaron Philon's been great, but I think I'm drawn to the bigs because Alabama just didn't have that. I mean, Nick Pringle kind of came on efficiently late in the season, but like there were times where Alabama just didn't have a big last year. Now they've got 2. Even and then you mentioned Jaron Stevenson. He's been better. So like really, you just the front court has just been like significantly better, and I think I'm just drawn to that. So maybe I'll go with Cliff Omeroy or Aiden Sherelle as just the 2 that have stood out to me. But a lot of that is just because the drastic difference in production they're getting from the front court.
yeah, I completely agree. That's a very I think that's the right answer. Is that's where this team is going to be. The biggest difference between this year and last year, like you said, not to knock Nick Pringle too much, but yeah, I think both Sherelle and Amori have been huge. And yeah, Sherelle totally to add to your point. I think I agree with you that he does look like a grown man out there. You don't have that much confidence in freshman bigs. They usually have to be multi-year guys, but he has shown that he can hang around, and obviously it'd be interesting to see as he plays better and better centers going forward, where how his minutes are managed and all that stuff. The one guy I'll throw in that we didn't mention, I think LeBaron, his play speaks for itself. I think he's going to continue starting games for this team. I think despite his freshman moments where he goes a little bit too fast, gets a little too panicked, sometimes makes the wrong decision. I think the raw potential is just there, and I think everyone sees it. The guy I'm gonna add is enjoy Darion Reed while you can. This kid is an NBA player. The decision making, the athleticism is just unbelievable. I mean, he's a 5-star recruit for a reason. There's one play I keep replaying over and over in my head against Arkansas State where he got the ball and you can like watch him because obviously when you're watching on TV or watching from the stands, it's easier to anticipate things, but you saw it almost looked like he was moving in slow motion. He catches a pass, spun, did a power dribble around a bigger defender, and I think he got fouled too on a layup. And I was just like, this guy's understanding and reading of the game is just ahead of people his age. He is going to be, I think, a one and done guy. The kid's phenomenal. I think if his 3-point develops, he's watch out. I think
Yeah,
he's
and
going to
he
be a
hit a
big.
3 against McNeese.
Yep.
He's really the if you look at the 3 position, he's kind of like the only 3 wing, on the team. I know that like you can maybe put like Stevens in there or but like really, yeah, Darren Reed's the only guy that can kind of play that 3 role. Nate Oates doesn't always play the 3 position. A lot of times he goes 3 guards, but having Darren Reed's ability to do that, I think just adds another element. If you need to play the 3 or go on a bigger lineup, I think a bigger lineup that isn't bulky, I think Reed can do that.
Yeah, he definitely can. He just gives you some kind of versatility, some variance that you can go to. So I asked Tony going forward. You mentioned, there are still some kinks to iron out with this team, and like you said, the main reason Oates plays these teams, Arkansas State picked to win the Sun Belt, McNeese picked to win the Southland. These are teams that are probably going to make the NCAA tournament. The reason you play those teams and not the teams that are projected to finish last in those conferences is because you want to find out what those kinks are and iron them out. So, from what you've noticed, what's maybe been the biggest thing? Because there's a lot you can go to, whether it's efficiency, shooting consistency, some stuff on the defensive end, turnovers, free throw shooting. What's maybe the biggest thing for you that needs to get ironed out? The most as Alabama, like you said, starts this gauntlet.
I think free throw is just obvious because I guess it's really easy to notice, when you're there, it's in a situation, just the natural nature of free throws is they're kind of in a spotlight. And so when Alabama's just only hitting 70% or 60% of them, it's kind of like it stands out a little bit more. I think they got to do a better job of playing their game and moving the ball. I think that's one of the things McNeese State did, kind of controlling the tempo. You look at just this game against Purdue that's coming up on Friday. Purdue's going to try to slow things down. Can Alabama kind of speed things back up and kind of play their game? I think that's kind of something that they're going to have to work on is, maybe, implementing their will on their opponents and kind of making sure the game goes in their direction. Not to say that they can't play in a slowdown. Like, this team's so diverse now. You mentioned they have two of everything. Like, now that they have bigs, I mean, you theoretically could play a more slowed down approach if you had to, but Alabama still doesn't want to play that way. So I think that just controlling the tempo is another big thing that they're going to have to work on.
Yeah, I'll piggyback off that a little bit. Like, I think it's just ball movement and decision making. To go back to LeBaron Philon, if he's going to be a starting guard at this level, I think that has to improve a little bit from him. When he does make right decisions, he makes great passes. I think he had 8 assists or 9 assists against Arkansas State, but and not to single him out because it's I think a collective issue, not just him, but yeah, I think it's some of the decision making. I've seen a lot where a player, particularly one of these guards, will drive to the rim and they'll look to take a tough floater or layup versus trying whether it's a dump down pass to a big or kicking it out to a 3-point shooter, and that's what Oates wants. He said it as much after Arkansas State. It has to be, why take a contested layup when you can take a wide open three? And he wants his players to kind of do that. And I think that'll come with confidence shooting. They haven't had the on fire game from deep yet this year, and I think maybe that's gotten in their heads a little bit. Obviously, Latrell Wrightsell, finally kind of shook the rust off against McNeese. I think he's a guy that if he can continue being an outlet and hitting threes, that'll help Alabama's offense move the ball better. Mark Sears, all excused from all this. The guy somehow scores 20 points on 8 shots. He's been ridiculous this year. But
How do we
yeah,
not
I
mention
think
years in this whole? Yeah.
yeah, and it's just we take him for granted at this point.
Right.
But yeah, he's been ridiculous. I mean, against McNeese, it was Sears, Wrightsell, and Nelson, the 3 Final Four guys who the only players in double figures. They were the only players I think that had a 3 other than the one by Reed that you mentioned. So it's good to see that those guys are when needed, they are the guys to step up. But yeah, I think it's some just better efficiency on offense against defenses. Will Wade threw a lot at that team. They pressed them, they played different kinds of zones, blitzed a lot in the half court, and I think that got to Alabama. You have to move the ball really well against teams that switch, and I think they just need to have kind of that off ball movement, people getting open more consistently. That's kind of what I want to see as the year kind of unfolds, or as the non-conference play continues. I'll ask you this to finish things off, to have a little fun. The gauntlet. We keep saying the gauntlet. I'll read the teams on the gauntlet. Alabama, after 3 straight home games to start the year, is now not home until December 14th, which is over a month from the time of this recording. They are at Purdue on Friday, then in Birmingham against Illinois. Then they go over to Las Vegas for the Players Era Festival tournament, where they will play Houston, Rutgers, 2 ranked teams. Houston's in the top 10. And then they will play one of either Texas A&M, Oregon, Creighton, or San Diego State, the way that tournament format works. And then they play at North Carolina in the ACC SEC Challenge. And then finally that game that they return home against Creighton When you hear all of those opponents, Tony, in the early season, which one of those teams are you most excited to see Alabama match up against? Obviously, Purdue played last year. Houston had a very good game a couple years ago. North Carolina, you've got the rematch of the Sweet 16. Creighton could play them twice in a 2-week
Yeah.
span, which would be
Well,
something. What are you excited for?
naturally, Alabama's biggest basketball rival, Creighton,
Yeah.
would be the answer to that, I think. Um, Look, actually, to be honest with you, the real answer to that is probably Creighton with Cockburner against Cliff. I'd love to see that. Give me that both times. Give me that the third game of the Players Era tournament, and give me that back in Tuscaloosa. I think that's going to be a fun matchup. Two of the best bigs in the nation. That will be fun to watch. So I wouldn't mind seeing that twice, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it'll be fun in Coleman, too. That was obviously a great game in Omaha to refresh people's memory. Mark Sears very nearly hit a buzzer beater to send that game to overtime from about half court. That was a fun one. And the Latrell Wrightsville revenge game, of course, the Omaha, Nebraska native. That's a good pick. I
And
think
there's
I'm going to go.
a revenge game, I guess, against the homecoming game, I guess, against Rutgers too. So yeah.
Yeah, and over in Vegas, that's a very good point. Rutgers, two very fun freshmen, probably going to be top 5 picks in that game. My pick is North Carolina, the Sweet 16 rematch, kind of for the similar reasoning. You have two of the best bigs in Kalkbrenner and Cliff in that game. You're gonna have two guys probably leading the way for the best guard in the country in R.J. Davis and Mark Sears. You saw them match up in the Sweet 16 last year, and that was a great game. I think it's going to be another really fun one. In Chapel Hill as well, you've got the homecoming for Jaron Stevenson, who is from Chapel Hill, to picked Alabama over North Carolina. I like that storyline element. I'm really excited for that. I think that's a great game for the ACC SEC challenge to kick things off. Like, I just think that'll be really fun. I enjoy when you don't have as many of these marquee non-conference games at one of the team's home stadiums anymore. So I like that they're going to North Carolina, to Purdue, and hosting Creighton. I think that's really fun. We're in for some good basketball, and to bring it all the way back, you mentioned that we found out about Alabama football in their game against LSU. We're going to find out what this Alabama basketball team really is after this run. So stay locked into Tide Illustrated for that. Stay locked in, obviously, for football coverage as the season goes on as well. But we'll have plenty of stuff. It's the busy season. Super exciting as November bleeds into December. We'll get closer to playoff football, get closer to conference play for basketball. We'll have it all on Tide Illustrated. Stay locked in there. Subscribe here on the YouTube if you have not already. And we'll see you next time.